around, but unfortunately, we're on a USC Zoom.
Find players, like figure out who you're going to group, because obviously there's like hundreds of, I mean, even thousands of organized players, whether you're recruiting for a college or whether you're doing for the NBA draft, even, there's a ton of guys out there. So is there any methods you particularly think are, effective at narrowing down the list of guys to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We get prospects from a lot of different places. I'm sure we're going to dive into analytics, and that's a piece of it, is looking at results from FIBA games, from transfers at the previous stop, from AAU shoe company data. That's a good way to find guys that are really productive, and then kind of run from there and see who we like. I go to as many FIBA events as possible. I think it's really important, if you want to recruit international basketball at a high level, to be there at the under 16 European Championships, under 18 European Championships. Go to the U19 World Cup, U17 World Cup. I just got back from the Afrobasket under 18, which was in Madagascar. I've also been to the events in the Americas, watching Brazil and Argentina and Chile and teams like that. So it's really a mix of all of it. And then the longer you do this, the longer you're in the business, in the profession, you're going to start to have a Rolodex of people that that want to help you, and they'll send you players as well. And we comb through all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But you don't really well, you did say that you look at stats to some extent, but you don't have like a system that you design, like maybe like my buddy, for example, at the step in, when we were there, we had like a thing where he made a stat for every Division I player, and what are their chances, was like a model to predict their chances of being drafted, not even like how good they'd be in NBA, but just whether to be drafted. And that would kind of narrow down the list, and would use that, and then from there we would like watch the top 200 or whatever, 100 guys in that list.
Yeah. So when I was at the University of San Francisco, we actually worked with a stats professor there named Stephen Devlin. Great guy, good at his job. And he put together a projection model for shoe company data. So Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, into college, and it would kind of sort players into predicted signing level, right? So high major, mid major, low major, not Division I. And that was really useful for us, because we could look through, and that was at sort of a mid-major type job, mid-major type level. We could look through and go, all right, here's a list of 10 guys that grade out as high major that don't have that recruitment, right? So you take your model and the predicted signing level, and you juxtapose that with verbal commits and what offers each of these players has at the moment. And then you go, all right, these might be some underrated guys. Now, we've always used analytics as a way to identify guys that are undervalued to dig into more, not necessarily as a be all that ends all. We're taking that guy because the number says we should, right? So once we picked out those 10 guys that are undervalued but very productive, we're then going to dive into synergy and watch maybe 100 clips of that guy, 100 offensive possessions of that guy, to figure out what we think, or we're going to get on a plane and go see him at an AAU event or a high school game, something like that. So it's really kind of marrying both worlds together.
Find any like sticky stats, almost like certain statistical like measures that seem to have like a very high predictive likelihood, like in determining like these players are like undervalued or stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, when we were going through the algorithm and kind of building it out, usage is really important. It's hard to have a high ceiling as a player for college. I'm looking more at college projection, because that's where I work. I don't work for the Clippers right now, so that's what I'm more concerned with. And it's hard to have a really high ceiling for college if you're not using any possessions in high school or in AAU. So those guys that are playing 30 minutes and only taking 3 shots, well, you're probably not going to be an all conference player if you play like that. you know. Now it's not the whole thing. You can't just go out there and take 25 shots and only make 4 of them. But if you can do a little bit of both, if you can be relatively efficient at a high usage level, that gives you a chance. What else is important? Height's really important. You know, if you're tall and use a lot of possessions, you got a good chance, you know. Wingspan's really important. Not all players have that data out there, but it's important and predictive. Things like stocks, so steals plus blocks, how often you're accruing those. That's a good proxy for athleticism, right? So if you're blocking a lot of shots and getting a lot of steals, you're probably a pretty good athlete, you know. Things like drawn foul seems to translate well, you know. I'm trying to think what else.
Sounds pretty similar to like what you go from college to NBA. Do you think it's like relatively like a model from college to NBA is pretty similar to a model from AU to college, more or less?
Yeah. I definitely
yeah,
think there's some comps for sure. I mean, and then you're always going to be intrigued by guys that maybe show more skills than is normal for that height, right? So if you're finding a 6'11" guy that is shooting threes and making them at a decent rate, it's going to be like, all right, we got to watch this guy. We got to figure out what's going on, you know, because those guys, the difference between the leagues, and I've coached at the Division III level, low major basketball, mid major basketball, and now high major basketball. And the biggest difference really is not the skill. It's the fact the athletes just get bigger, faster, and stronger as you move up in levels. You know, there's guys that I coached at the Division III level that were unbelievable shooters, unbelievable dribblers. I mean, your guy Avinash, your head coach at USC.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an elite shooter. He went to Johns Hopkins, which is where I used to coach. My boss at Washington State was an unbelievable shooter at Hamilton College. They both played Division III, and they both had seasons where they shot over 50% from 3. Right. So the reason they didn't play at the high major level had nothing to do with their ability to shoot. You know, it had to do with size, athleticism, things like that, you know, and I think that's pretty standard, you know. So as you move up in levels and you find those guys that do have the right skills but are bigger, you know, they're 2 inches taller, they're a little more explosive, they're a little longer. Those are the guys you want to really dig into.
Makes sense. So like maybe more from like an international perspective, right? Like is your approach to like finding sleepers in a sense, is that constant throughout like the different like types of international competition versus like more like domestic shoe company like tourneys? Like how does your approach change based on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something Mike and I have talked about a little bit, and it's in the notes you guys sent over. This idea of like upside versus the mean, you know, on each player, and I think the more challenging of a job that you're at, or resource disadvantaged, or however you want to say it, the more you have to kind of chase upside, right? Because we're in a strong link sport, meaning our sport is in large part determined by your 3 best players. If Team A's 3 best players are better than Team B's, they're probably going to win, even if you know Team B's bench is way better. You know,
even the one best player, even if you just have the one, that's already like a huge advantage. But
no question. And all the analytics bears that out, especially at the NBA level, which is why we have these ferocious wars on free agents, and you know, teams sending 6 first-round picks and pick swaps for blue chippers and stuff like that, is because those guys are really important, you know. So when I'm evaluating, when I'm trying to find prospects, I'm trying to find guys that have a chance of getting into that top 3, you know, that can be all conference players, you know, and they're not all going to be, and you're going to bring in some guys sometimes that you think can or should be an all conference player, and they don't get there. that happens all the time too. But you're always kind of trying to keep an eye toward at least having a couple that get in that rarefied air.
I have a what's it called? This kind of off the path question, but like I was just thinking because you're talking about how the coaches were such great shooters, and I was thinking like Steve Kerr was a great shooter, obviously very good coach. I wonder like what stat would we use for players to predict their coaching success? You think like shooting would be up there? That's what I
Yeah,
feel like.
that's a good one because you gotta work really hard at your craft. I mean, there's nobody that just rolls out of bed at, I don't know, 12 and is an incredible shooter. It doesn't work
Right.
that way. Like you might have really good hand-eye coordination like Steph, but you also got thousands and thousands and thousands of hours in the gym. So it probably speaks to some level of stick-to-itiveness, of grit, of being able to take your punches and have some things not go your way and still stay determined to get better at what you do and what you love.
Yeah, and understanding like skill and how to build skill, right? So you could attorneys, like in general, how valuable is seeing guys in person? I mean, obviously you want to get to know them and like talk to them to that extent, but outside of that, just from the strictly like on court perspective, what's it called? How important is it for you to see a guy in person? Because I know some people that won't even like rate guys until they see them in person, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's important because it's a good way to evaluate athleticism, kind of being there in person and just seeing how explosive a guy is. I think it helps a lot evaluating defensive potential, because the stats are going to show up on synergy if you're trying to watch a guy on defense on there. They're just going to be the loud plays. They're going to be block shots. They're going to be steals. You're not going to see like the little things that matter on defense when a guy beats a screen or denies a pass to the wing. Like nothing happened there, so it doesn't show up in a box score, but it helps a lot on defense. If the other team isn't able to move the ball easily around the perimeter, if they're being pressured, that stuff all contributes to having a good defense. Beyond that, there's other stuff that you just can't get off highlights, off clips of guys, like a synergy, and that
But
is
you could, sorry, but you could watch like a big, like the whole game. I mean, like the
you
full
could
game. Yeah, like, do you think?
you could
Yeah, like definitely the
That'd
athleticism.
be
I
a
would
little
agree.
better. That'd be a little better. I still think kind of being there live and seeing it, I think it can help. The other thing that's hard to pick up on if you're not live is interactions with teammates, interactions with coaches, interactions with referees, good body language, bad body language, a lot of high fives, leadership qualities. Like when you're actually up close and you can hear them talk and stuff, you can see who has a presence about them, who the other guys respect and want to listen to, and sometimes who they think is a jerk. I mean, that'll happen sometimes too, and you can really tell the other guys on the floor detest playing with this guy. So now, am I saying that should be the be all that ends all, and you should just take a guy that everybody likes, and you should never take the guy that they don't like? No, but it factors in. It needs to be a piece of the larger puzzle. I mean, I'm not really in a position where I can name a lot of names right now on this for compliance reasons, but I mean, there's a guy I watched this summer that is a highly touted foreign prospect. His teammates don't like playing for him. I mean, playing with him. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty clear. Like when you're there in person, you can tell that there's some bad blood, bad synergy.
Yeah, that definitely matters. But I think there's also advantages to film, right? Because like the little stuff you talked about, like the defensive stuff, I feel like you could catch that better on film because you could rewind. I think that's a big advantage to film that you don't have live.
Absolutely. I mean, if we were in a vacuum and I had to either choose between, watching 100 offensive possessions in a row on synergy or watching a game of a guy live, I would take the 100 possessions. I think you get more, and mostly because you just can see more things back to back to back to back to back. Whereas if you just watch one game, you might only see 12 possessions where guys really doing. There's going to be a lot of time where they're not that involved in the play.
But
So that would be the
what
difference.
So, yeah, but like, what about a full game? Just watching a film or watching live? You would go live, right? I'm guessing.
I,
Just one full game, either.
yeah, if I have to watch a full game either way, I would say live. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm a big proponent of synergy and of watching these streams of a guy, over the course of 15, 20 games, a bunch of clips in a row, because you really can get a good understanding of the breadth of skills that player possesses. You get to see him shoot a bit, you get to see him drive, you get to see him use ball screens. You see how it all kind of comes together. And
It's kind of
that's a
difficult.
big part of it. Yeah,
Sorry,
it takes time.
sorry, keep interrupting you. But yeah, just I was thinking it's kind of like difficult for me to when I watch like synergy clips to contextualize that stuff sometimes because what's it called? It's not in the flow of the game, and I'm so used to watching like a full
Yeah.
game, and so that's like difficult to tell how often they're doing something because you just have all of their clips, and yeah, it's you know what I mean. It's kind of hard to focus. Do you have it, or you don't really have that issue? You're kind of used to doing it.
No, it is, but I like it. I've gotten used to it. I think it gives you can get a good sense of their abilities. Sometimes it is hard to figure out how that player fits in the wider context of the team and how they interact with other teammates, because like in 100 clips you might see 10 really good possessions where the guy uses a pick and roll, puts the defender in jail, maybe looks off the tag and hits the roller late, and you go, wow, this guy's a great playmaker. He really understands ball screen offense. This will project well. But if that's 10 times over the course of 20 games, that's not so great. That's you're not doing
Right,
that a lot. You're doing that occasionally.
right,
So
right.
that's you got to kind of contextualize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that's kind of like been the problem for me on Synergy because, like, yeah, I could tell like their skills, but it's tough to me to like the degree of the skill, like
Yeah.
because I'm so used to watch. But yeah, yeah, you're probably right though. If you do that a lot, you kind of get used to it, and you kind of your brain kind of adjusts to it. So that's probably like the trick to doing that. I'm
You
guessing.
might be better at this than I am too. That's also a possibility.
I don't know about that. uh,
I had
um,
one question about like, so when you are like trying to use these like different proxies to determine like the best prospect for like your team, like what exactly constitutes that, right? Like, are you looking for a player who's like you said they're trying to be like the top three best player on your team, but how much is like projection, like projecting how they fit into a role, like work into like
Yeah. Yeah.
analysis?
No, that's definitely important, is figuring out how all the players go together. And sometimes you just need a guy that can connect everybody, meaning they can guard their position and they can knock down open threes. They can, if it's a five, maybe they can really defend the pick and roll and they can finish on the roll. You can throw them lobs, they can dunk it, that sort of thing. And those guys are important, and you can't have five stars on the court at the same time. Basketball just doesn't work that way. You're going to have probably one alpha and two more sidekicks, and everybody else is going to be a role player. And that's just sort of the truth of how our sport works. So if you're what you're hoping to do as you're building the program is have guys expand their role as they get older, right? So maybe as freshmen, they're in some sort of limited role. And then as sophomores, they're playing a more prominent role. And then as juniors, maybe they're one of those three guys, and if they stay for a fifth year, they're the guy. Getting old in college basketball is really important. It's something we're trying to do a better job of at Washington State. Is developing our roster and our age. But it's highly predictive. If you look it up, a lot of the oldest teams in our sport win at a higher rate than the youngest teams throughout the one and done Kentucky team. Like once you take them out of the pile, it's a pretty good correlation.
So kind of like an intuitive corollary of that, right? Is like,
Yeah.
or when you're trying to build a recruiting class, right? Like when you try to go like up the tiers, I assume like these players, obviously they have a higher like hopes and dreams of making the NBA, right? So
Yeah.
they're more resistant to the fact that like you're gonna have to be there for a longer period of time. So how do you like value? How do you talk to like these players and like discuss the effects of like projection and role versus like their like wants and needs towards it.
And that's what's unique about this level, right? Like that's a challenge you don't deal with really at the low major level or even the vast majority of mid majors.
Yeah.
Is this concept of like leaving early,
But
but
they could transfer. They could transfer.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
Yeah.
their but yeah, go on.
Yeah. No, it's a big factor in it now, especially. And we have been lucky enough to have a couple guys that are going to be close. They're going to be on that boundary. Obviously, USC's had some too. But like our guy Mohammed Gay, probably, he flirted with the draft process this spring, and I'm sure we'll have some good opportunities next spring, especially if he does what we all think he's going to do. And when it comes to those guys, like our job is to promote them and help them have the careers and the futures that they want. I mean, no one's rooting harder for Muhammad than we are. We want him to be a first round pick this spring. That'd be an amazing success story for him, for our program, for our recruiting, for our player development, everything. But yeah, it makes things more complex at this level for sure, because you're not guaranteed to keep guys for 4 or 5 years the way you often are at other levels, especially in the past before the portal kind of took over.
Yeah, it's like a weird contradiction where a guy might be like better in a vacuum than another guy, but then if the other guy's a little worse and he'll stay another year, that makes him a lot more valuable potentially, because you'll have that extra year when he's older. So yeah, that's interesting. And like kind of to go off that, do you create player rankings? Do you find value in ranking recruits against another, or are you kind of just maybe look at the RSI and stay away from it most?
Yeah. So this is somewhere that I think this is a difference between the NBA and the college level. Like I'm more interested in turning over all these stones, looking at different pipelines, transfers, JUCO, international recruits, local, regional guys, and putting together a list of guys that are definitely good enough, right? And then trying to get those guys and really putting the time into convincing them to come, and showing them how awesome of a place Washington State is and our program and how we develop guys. That's where I want to put the time in. Whereas like if I were in an NBA front office, that's where you need to spend a lot of time really figuring out, is player A 2% better or 2% worse than player B? Like your rankings really, really matter, because you're doing a draft. That's how you're getting the guys. You're in an order,
right,
and you're picking them. That's not necessarily how it works in college basketball recruiting. It's not a draft. It's a convincing process. It's them making the decision on their own, visiting different schools, figuring out that there isn't even a stopping date. Some guys sign early, some sign late, some sign way after the late deadline. So I'm more interested in tiering them into guys that are definitely good enough, guys that should get there, guys that I need to see some more of before we make a decision, and that's just my list, right? And then you have our other assistants are going to have lists, and the head coach, his list is what matters the most, right? So hopefully his list is as strong as possible. That's our job as assistants, is to give him good options to choose from.
Is your primary focus like recruiting mostly, or do you do just as much like in game kind of or like prep and stuff like that in the course of the season? Or
yeah, you do a little bit of all of it. You wear a lot of different hats. I mean, I think during the summer things tilt slightly toward recruiting. Just that's the time we're allowed to be out. That's when all the FIBA events are going on. That's when all the AU events are going on. So you tend to put that hat on a little more firmly. And now we're going into the time of the year when it's really about developing our team and making our team as good as it possibly can be. And all the assistants on staff, we have a lot of responsibilities with opponent scouting, with player development for the guys, with showing them film of of how we do things on each side of the ball, different techniques, type adjustments, whether it's our pick and roll coverage when we're on ice on the side, flat showing in the middle, how we double the post when we do that. So a lot of that comes into play now, and analytics is involved with that too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so do you use a lot of analytics for like stuff like prep and then in-game adjustments and stuff, or do you mostly like just use the eye test and the coaches discuss it among each other and stuff like that? Or
No, we try to use data to influence any and all decisions that we can, right? So in terms of opponent scouting, before we even put anything on the floor or talk to the team, we're going to look at their points per possession, both sides of the ball. We're going to look at the 4 factors. We're going to figure out, all right, this team, really good effective field goal percentage, but they turn it over a lot. This team defends the rim extremely well, but they give up a lot of threes, and that's going to give us an idea maybe of what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then on an individual level, when I'm, preparing the team for Oregon's 9 players that they play in their rotation or however many it may be, we're going to look at their usage rates, how often they play. We're going to look at percentage of shots that are threes, right? So that's a good way to tell a player how hard they're going to close out. Like if a guy, 80% of his shots are threes, that's what he's looking to do, right? So when you close out, it's going to be a fly-by closeout. You're getting them off the line, making them dribble. On the other side of the spectrum, if 90% of their shots are twos, well, I'm going to chop my feet, close out a little short because that guy is probably looking to put the ball on the floor. We're going to look at percentage of threes that are assisted versus unassisted, right? So if like we had a guy this past year, Mike Flowers, who was a good player for us, and over half of his threes were unassisted, right? So what does that mean? That means he's taking a lot of threes off the dribble, So if I'm defending against Mike, I got to know that, I got to know that I can't just retreat. I can't go under ball screens. I can't give this guy space because that's what he wants. Those are good shots for him, Whereas another guy where 96% of his shots or 96% of his made threes are assisted, maybe we can go under ball screens on that guy because he's only looking to catch and shoot. What else is there? Rebounding rates, offense and defense. You can figure out which players are priority to make sure we're blocking out, which guys are just running back on defense. And then those are guys that you can just kind of run in and try to grab the ball. So there's little ways it impacts kind of everything we do.
is there ever cases where your like opinion, what you're seeing in the stats, like heavily disagree, and you have to like kind of make a decision, or it's like not very often, or maybe it just depends on the situation? It's kind of hard to give a general.
It can happen. I mean, sometimes you're surprised by how many steals a guy gets or something. Maybe he doesn't shine in the tape as an incredible defensive prospect, but then you look at the steal rate and he's 12th in the country, and it might turn out that guy just has a really good feel for being in passing lanes, for predicting what's going to happen next and jumping a pass or something. Or it might be random. It might be a little bit of luck if it's early in the season. We're only 6 games in, So yeah, but as far as opponent scouting, I think the film is really, really important. I think the stats give you a opening direction for what you need to focus on, what you need to be good at to beat that team, what strengths of theirs you need to minimize. But then you got to know enough basketball and enough technique and be able to teach it in order to take advantage of that stuff, right? So it's not good enough for me to just get in front of the team and say, hey, this team forces a ton of turnovers. We have to not turn it over. It's like, thanks. How do we do that? And that's where the film comes in. It's like, all right, here's a couple actions where we're going to go backdoor, where we're going to take advantage of their aggressiveness and we're going to turn into backdoor layups. Here's a set, maybe they play a weird zone on end line out of bounds that confuses teams and create turnovers. Here's a couple sets to make sure we get the ball in bounds. That just different ways to take away their ability to create havoc. Maybe they press you a lot, so you're going to spend time on your press break and staying behind the ball and making yourself available in the middle of the floor and trying to cash out on that stuff. So the stats give you an opening direction of the things that you need to prioritize, what you need to spend time on, what needs to be important. But then you better be able to teach basketball and use the film to show them what they actually need to do.
Like 3-point defense, there's a lot of research out there that like jump shooting defense is almost like there's no way to really like predict it, and it doesn't seem to have like any like consistent about like way to make predictions about it. Yeah, like perimeter shooting percentage, especially like no, like interior shooting on defense is very like you could depending on how good your players are, you could find ways to anticipate that. But perimeter defense, like outside shooting defense, seems to be almost quote unquote random, obviously not completely, but when looking at something like that, like does that influence your decision making in any way, or you're just we have certain fundamentals we teach in basketball, and that's probably the correct way to defend outside shooting?
No, for sure. I mean, we've been a defense going back to the Randy Bennett, St. Mary's days, Coach Smith's teams at Columbia, with the exception of 1 year. His teams at San Francisco. We've been a defense that limits 3-point attempts, because that's the thing that the data says we as coaches have control over, is we can make it hard for the opponent to get up 3-point shots. We'll tell our team this, I'll literally use this quote: once the ball is in the air, we don't control the outcome, and that's really what that data that you're referencing means, is you have a lot of control over not letting the opponent get the shot off, of making them pump fake, making them dribble. But once it leaves their hand, it's in God's hands. I mean, it's random, it's probability, it's whatever it may be. It's you can't do anything about it at that point. So if we're playing a couple great 3-point shooters, the biggest thing we're going to influence or emphasize is not letting them get up threes. So we're going to talk about sellout closeouts. Flying by them, getting them off the line, making them dribble.
This type of scouting, like scouting for opponents, like we're talking about right now, and then more like for recruiting scouting, do you think like stats are more valuable in either one of those? And just in general, do you like kind of draw a distinction between those two? Because that's like, for me, that's kind of the two types of scouting. I kind of look at it as those two different types of scouting. Obviously for me, I focus more on the like recruiting or like player projection as opposed to it. But do you agree that that's like a good way to kind of categorize types of scouting, or do you think maybe there's another type or something, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know what, I would say I slightly prefer the data for opponent scouting, and I think the main reason for that is I just think the data is better and cleaner and more accurate. Right. So there have been some problems in the past with the AAU data, and it's natural. I mean, the kids that are keeping track of these stats at AAU games, they're 20-year-olds that are trying to keep track of assists while sending out a fire tweet or on Snapchat. Like they're not zoned in. It's not that important to them in general. These aren't like NBA analytics guys that are doing the statting. There aren't people who really care about this stuff necessarily. So you can have some problems with the data that needs to be cleaned up. Now, if it's scraped off Synergy, that's a little bit better. The Synergy data seems to be that their box scores at least seems to be a little cleaner than just grabbing stuff off D1 circuit. But it doesn't even compare to the quality of the data for current Division I teams in Division I games.
How much does projection influence your like recruiting style, right? Like not necessarily like the role projection, but more so like skill projection. Like if you see like a very raw player, like what types of indicators or parts of their game can you like point out and be like, all right, these are indicators that they can flourish as like a shooter or like a ball handler? Just like generally, like how does projection interplay with?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's always this battle between production versus projection, right? What they can do right now versus what they could do in the future, you know? And I think what I've kind of settled on is like, let's say we weren't going to play a basketball game for 10 years. Um, what I would do then is I would assemble a team of guys with incredible biomechanics, right? Guys that have great dimensions and measurables, are extremely explosive, move well, because we have time to improve the skills. You got time to teach the shooting, to teach our offense, to teach pick and roll reads, to teach all that sort of tiki taka passing and dexterity. You know, on the other hand, if we were playing a game in 5 minutes and I don't have time to prepare the team in any way, to put in any plays, to familiarize anybody with anything, I just want five guys that are extremely skilled, guys that can dribble, pass, and shoot, because the other team's going to be confused. We're going to be confused. There's going to be broken plays. There's going to be open court. And guys with a great feel and great passing and great skill, they're going to create a lot of open baskets, you know? So there's sort of a balance between those two, and in my mind, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. You know, we're not playing in 10 years, but we're also not playing in 5 minutes. So we need guys with the right biomechanics and dimensions and athleticism, but you better have some skill too. You know, you better be able to bring something to the table in terms of putting the ball in the basket, you know? So I would say in general, I tend to tilt towards really good athletes. You know, that's how I've recruited, and what I've sort of spent a lot of time focusing on finding, because I think those guys have an ability to shoot the moon and potentially be those top three type talents that we talked about. You know, if you take a guy that's really long and really big for his position and he becomes a great shooter, well, now you got something. Now you really got a guy who could be a pro prospect or could be an all conference player. But the reality is that it's all important. It's all important. There's plenty of undersized guys that can really shoot the ball and have a beautiful mind that are awesome college basketball players. I mean, we had a couple last year. Mike Flowers is a really, really good player for us, and Mike's not the quickest guy I've ever coached. You know, he has some limitations physically, but he had an unbelievable understanding of the game, and he could really, really, really shoot the ball. You know, and those things are valuable. And he was a really good leader. Everybody respected him and appreciated him.
Do you think you could, provided a player has like high level of physical talent and like ability and stuff, you feel like from your response, it seems like you're a big believer of being able to teach guys most of like the skill stuff, but also like feel and stuff like that, I think is more intrinsic. Do you agree with that, or do you think you could there's ways to kind of develop guys understanding of the game pretty significantly? Obviously there's to a degree you could, but how significantly are you a believer into developing something like that?
Yep. I mean, I think among the skills, probably shooting is the most teachable. Doesn't mean it's easy. I mean, it takes a lot of time, and you need to have a good shooting coach, and you need to have the right demeanor about not being too critical too early. You know, I mean, you're not going to be a good shooting coach if you're swearing at a guy the first day, you know, make the fucking shot. Like that's not going to go anywhere. You know, like you need to have that patient sort of long view of the room to get the guy there. Now, in terms of passing and feel and seeing the court, I do think there's some intrinsic stuff to that. I mean, I know like Spain, for instance, tries to measure spatial recognition at a young age, you know, and that's part of how they identify which guard prospects, and especially point guard prospects, to invest time into, right? Because that's part of the job. Is you're going to have to be able to see sort of a step ahead, to see where people are about to go, where their arms are about to go, to find the little pockets in between, and I think that's part of why the Spanish national team and a lot of their players play with a level of creativity in the pick and roll that you don't necessarily see in a lot of other places in the world, you know. So so is a lot of that intrinsic? Sure. But I think some of it's teachable too. I mean, we had a team at Johns Hopkins where we progressively got better and better in the pick and roll just by slowly building, you know, working on hitting the roller against a show. Then now they're tagging, now we're throwing back. Then we're splitting it, maybe we're running around it, then we're going against drop, and you just kind of slowly build on a foundation and get it better and better and better and better, you know. So I do think that stuff is teachable.
That's interesting. Do you know like the process they do that to like measure spatial awareness? And do you have any like thoughts of how?
I haven't done it. I've gotten a few little anecdotal stories about it and different guys over the years that have really blipped the radar. I think it's a soccer thing. I think that's originally where it came from, is they would find youth players that like we said, had really excellent scores on spatial recognition, you know, where different objects are moving at different rates and they can predict what happens next. And you know, again, I haven't taken the test myself, but I know they utilize it in choosing who to invest time and resources into. And that's pretty cutting edge. I mean, I've never heard of anything like that in the US for sure.
Have you thought about any stuff that maybe like drills or something like that could help improve like feel or vision? I mean, obviously, maybe you don't want to share some of the stuff, but like if you have any thoughts on it.
I think tape helps a lot. I mean, I think one of the things we've done at past locations is give the kids at the end of the year a video of all their pick and rolls that they used, but broken down into each type, right? So if it's an empty corner side ball screen, maybe we'll watch, it might be 30 clips in a row against maybe an ice coverage. Then you give them the next 40 clips or against a hard show. Then there's 50 clips against drop. You know, now you're looking at a ball screen in the middle of the floor, maybe one shake guy in the corner, and against all those different coverages, and so on and so forth, right? And so what that allows them to do is see it a bunch of times in a row in very similar, but not the same, but very similar circumstances each time, and see what they could have done a little bit different that would have helped them out.
You think players don't watch enough film, or do you think they already watch it? Don't you just a matter maybe of like being more particular with the film you choose for them and stuff?
Yeah, I think it helps them. I mean, I think we're naive as coaches if we think they're going to be able to download the film online, cut it up themselves, figure, like, they might download it and just watch it. You know, you're helping your guys if you can do the work of cutting it into what they need to see, you know, in the order that they need to see it. You know, I think you can put together teaching tapes that sort of present the narrative that you need, you know, that teach the lesson that you need, you know, that show them how to set up a pick and roll, right? So I'm going to bring the defender down below the level of the screen. I'm going to make sure that as I'm coming off, my shoulder is tight to the screener's shoulder so that there's no space for that defender to punch the gap. But if you can demonstrate that with film of them, that really reinforces the point.
Yeah, I didn't ask the question. I didn't mean like players don't watch like their lazy. I just meant like maybe the coaches aren't showing them enough film, or like do you think like coaches should? But yeah, you answered.
I'm a big believer in film. I think it's a great way
Yeah.
to teach guys skills. I mean, I think we're all human, right? It's easier to understand somebody saying something if you see it yourself. You know, seeing is believing, as the adage goes, right? So if you could show them, hey, you've been on them about something, and then they see it on film, a lot of times they go, man, coach was right. You know, that's what we hope. At least we hope they say that.
Have you?
Yeah, I have like a couple questions about like outlier development, like specifically like shooting and ball handling, right? So like are there certain profiles that you like scout, maybe at like a FIBA, and maybe they're shooting like 20% from three, and like certain profiles that they're like more malleable to like these touch improvements. So you can say like you can see like certain like aspects of their game and just be like, these are indicators that they can become a better shooter. And like if so, like what are these indicators?
Yeah, I mean, I think with shooting, you definitely every guy that I evaluate, I'm gonna have some notes on their shooting form,
Yeah.
right? And the most basic is just, is their form workable? Like, is it something that we are going to be able to improve in college, which is usually 4 years or less? Like, can we make strides with how they shoot the ball where they can become a reliable 3-point shooter, right? So what does that mean? Well, if they're shooting, if they've got a lot of movement where the ball changes pockets from right to left into the shot or left to right into the shot, that's going to be challenging. You know, if they're really releasing with two hands and not one, that's going to be hard to fix. You know, if the release point is really low from the chest, from the chin, that's going to be hard to fix. You know, so you look at, it's almost disqualifiers, right? So if they have one or two of these like really hard things to overcome, that's something we got to note down. If it looks pretty good and, you know, the elbow looks right and the ball's spinning the right way and they're releasing with one hand, they're not pushing it with both, if the release point's pretty high, then you got a chance. You know, then you go, all right, can we just rep this out? Is this an issue of this guy just needs to shoot 300 threes a day with a coach, and then over the course of a year he'll get there? And a lot of times that's the case. I mean, I can say I'm only 29 now. I turned 30 in November. Just in my last 10 years of doing this, the level of shooting that you see in the average high school or AAU kid has gone up. There's more guys that can reliably shoot threes. There's less guys out there with really crazy forms, you know. So it's the bucket of guys that have a chance of becoming good shooters is just a bigger bucket than it used to be.
So
I think that the training with the community of trainers and coaches has really grown too, and we've all gotten better and more like detailed, and like guys at a really young age have like personal trainers now, like especially among like high major type of guys. But yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
By the way, that's a soda. I guess I should qualify that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like wouldn't you say like on the opposite side of that, right? Like if a player has like very smooth form, like they're gathered, just like overall like, the pull fluid is very smooth, but they're still like they still like subpar shooting percentages. Doesn't that like indicate like some sort of like inherent like touch deficiency within them? Like would you like go with would you like try to recruit a player like that, or is like how does the projection aspect of that work?
No, it could. I mean, I think gun to my head, I would still, if they're shooting a really nice percentage, but the form looks really jacked up,
Yeah.
I would still rather go with the guy who has a kind of textbook form, but is shooting 27% right now. You know, I just think the reps can catch up. Certain types of forms just won't improve as you shoot further back. You know, like if you're shooting on too much of a line drive, those couple feet further back, moving back the line can make a big difference. You know,
What do you mean by line drive?
the arc on your ball, right? If
Yeah.
your ball
Okay.
has a low degree arc, so it's 40 degrees entering the rim or 38 or something, not 45, 46, 47, that's not going to move back very well. You know, once you're shooting 20-foot, 22-foot threes, that's going to be hard.
And do you think like there's like some sort of how like touch influence other forms of outlier development? Like if there's players that have like a high level of like touch or like feel, do you think that can lead to them having like improved playmaking or like even improved ball handling? Have you seen any like anecdotal stories of this sort of like phenomenon?
Yeah, I think they're pretty related. I mean, guys that have a really good like are really crafty layup makers at the rim,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to be pretty good passers too. But I can't tell you why that is. I can't, you know. I mean, Kyrie comes to mind. Like, he's a really talented layup maker who also has a really creative brain, and he's not always a pass first player, but he definitely has the ability to throw every pass that you need to throw. He's got all the tools in his bag.
So like more like ball handling specifically, like as you've been coaching like at your various stops and you've seen like players make like maybe outlier developments within like their ball handling. Like, do any of these players have specific traits or like characteristics that like you could point to could be a particular like indicator for the outlier development?
Yeah, I think like if you guys have read that Grit book, I think that yeah, I think that plays into it a lot. The guys that make huge jumps in their skill set tend to work really, really hard and be sort of single-minded in what they're trying to get done. And they're not discouraged very easily. They don't have one bad shooting day and then not touch a ball for 2 weeks. They have a bad shooting day and then they decide they're going to get up early the next day and get some more shots up to get better. They have a growth mindset of, I may be here right now, but tomorrow I'm going to be here. And the day after that, I'm going to be here. And it's just going to keep getting better and better, So anecdotally, I think that's part of it, is the guys that make a big skill jump really, really work at it, care about it, and have a positive mindset about their ability to improve.
Are there any like physical or athletic traits within like these players who have become like immensely better ball handlers that you can like track?
Or how could somebody who doesn't have like a personal familiarity with players could maybe recognize the type of players that are hard workers and more likely to work on their game?
Mike, if you figure that out, you will make a lot of money. Daryl Morey will be calling you. Mark Cuban will be calling you. You will be able to, buy some new houses and condos and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's
That's
hard.
why I'm asking you. I'm
Yeah,
trying
it's hard. If I had the solution, I'd be running my own team at this point. But it's you can get some hints to it in the recruiting process. I mean, if you talk to the kids a lot, you can get a sense for who's responsible and who's not. And I think that goes somewhat hand in hand with it. I mean, Carol Dweck talks about in her book certain or some of her follow-up books, like certain questions that you can ask, different surveys you can give guys to try to sort out for both grit and also growth mindset as well. And those things are important. Now, have we taken it to the extreme of sending every kid we recruit a survey to figure out what kind of grit they have? No, we haven't done it. But we probably should. And I do try to ask guys what's the biggest hurdle or obstacle they've had to overcome in their life, because I think that's important. If they can't give you any answer at all, that maybe tells you it hasn't been a very challenging life and there hasn't been a lot of adversity. If so you just kind of listen for that stuff, because it can be a good sign, even according to the professionals, of having those traits.
So like somebody who's had adversity maybe in their life could be, like you said,
and has gone through it.
Yeah.
You can kind of screen for growth mindset. Like, when something bad happens, do you go to this sort of woe is me, this always happens to me, or do you go with, oh, this is an obstacle, this is an opportunity to improve? And those are sort of two different ways to look at things: glass half full, glass half empty. But the people that improve at stuff tend to view it more as opportunities for improvement rather than crushing blows to their lives.
And for the people like me who haven't read the Grit book, like you would suggest that we should put that on our reading list, huh?
Absolutely. And I'm far from an expert. It's a good book. It's definitely made me think a lot about coaching philosophy and how to be the best mentor for our players that I can be. But I would, Grit, I think, by Angela Duckworth is really important.
I wanted to ask, like, how do you think like coaching maybe like colors your like approach to scouting players as opposed to be like maybe somebody from the media or maybe somebody like myself who's kind of an amateur or maybe somebody in the front office who doesn't deal directly with the players and like like you said you do some of the game planning and like preparation and stuff in the course of the season and yeah how does that maybe like make your approach different and maybe what advice could you give to people to that we don't see without having your type of experience.
I don't know, Mike. You do a really good job. So I'll start there. I rely, full disclosure to everybody, I rely on him a lot to identify different prospects from around the globe, and we're not afraid to argue offline about guys we really like or don't like, or who we believe in, who we think the stats are misleading on, or so on and so forth. But I think I think your biggest advantage in scouting and in projection, which is fundamentally what we're in. We're in the business of projection, is being able to take in all information without being hurt by it, without being insulted by it, and try to use as much information to bear on your decisions. Whether that's taking analytics, taking maybe the couple games you saw in person, taking the clips off Synergy. Maybe you have 4 or 5 scouting reports from different people. Maybe you have some intel on the kid's background and home life and adversity. Maybe their injury history. Trying to take it all in, because I think at times it can be hard to do. It's easier to make a decision quickly and kind of just jump into it, or say, I'm right, I'm the expert, it's Mike doesn't know what I know, or so on and so forth. But the best way to do it is kind of take everything in. Doesn't mean you have to make a consensus, doesn't mean you have to pick the mean among all the opinions, but just take it in, hear it all out with an open mind, because it might help you think of something else that better informs your decision and helps the program, helps you get that pick right if you're an NBA team. I think obviously I have not worked in the NBA, so I'm a little bit speaking out of turn, but I do think it would be beneficial to NBA teams if their guys were more collaborative, more interdisciplinary, if their analytics guys also went to some games and maybe went to AU or watched AU on Synergy, I should say, or went to FIBA stuff. If their international scout also went to some Pac-12 and SEC games, if their SEC, ACC scout also went to some FIBA events and also had some working knowledge of stats and projection algorithms and things like that. Because I do think NBA offices get very siloed. You're the expert on international recruiting. You're the expert on the SEC. You're the expert on analytics, and then everybody disagrees, and the GM has to decide who they're going to go with. that seems to be what happens, So I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it.
How would you say like your prior experiences, like your maybe like academic background or like just like the sum of your prior experiences, how has that influenced your approach to coaching or analytics in general?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I'm really thankful for the path that I've been on, because there's different challenges to every place and different advantages. I mean, like I had a blast when I was coaching D3. It was a absolutely great time. Now we had a really good team, and that was a big part of it. But it was get in the trenches and coach the team. Like we were really invested in our guys. Like the talent disparity between your like one of the least talented teams in the league and one of the most talented teams in the league is not that big. It's somewhat negligible. It's not nothing, like it matters, but it's there's no NBA players in any of those games, right? Whereas at this level, I mean, you'll play in some games in conference where one guy is just way more talented than everybody, So it changes how you have to approach the game. You have to really build your plan around neutralizing that one guy and being able to double them and send help and rotate out and deny them catches and what I call best player defense. Whereas best player defense wasn't a big part of D3 scouting. I mean, D3 was more about our style of play and being fundamentally sound and not beating ourselves and playing together as a team and beating the opponent 5-on-5, you know. But there's different things at every level. I mean, recruiting at this level is a lot more complicated. The kids have much more, they have many more options, and they have more people in their lives that are talking to them and telling them how good they are and where they should go to school. And maybe they're telling them they should go pro instead. And once they get to school, they're telling them, no, the coach isn't playing you enough. You should transfer. Like there's a lot more that goes into it at this level. Nobody on the Johns Hopkins team was silently sitting there and being like, maybe I should leave and go to Swarthmore. Like that wasn't a factor. So but it's been cool, man. It's been cool to kind of be on this journey and see different things and try to take little slivers of experiences from each place.
I wanted to ask what's it called, to go back to like taking in different things and stuff. Like I know we talked about like you don't make like actual rankings, but like say like just play along, like say you were making a ranking for the draft, like and you had like a guy 20th, but then you have a source. It could be like a statistical model, or it could be somebody that that you really trust, but you're not really understanding, or you're not really like aware of why they're disagreeing with you, but like this person or this system is very like trustworthy. Would you change your like ranking somewhat to accommodate that without even necessarily agreeing, or do you think that you should kind of stick more to what you had if you don't really agree with
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to take all the information to bear, and I forget the name of the book, but I read a book that was all about just forecasting and projection, not just in sports, but in the weather, in politics, and all these different disciplines, economics. And one of the traits of, first off, projecting is really hard. It's more folly than great success. But one of the traits of the people that are the best predictors is that they're willing to change their mind. If you see get new information in that is contrary to what you think, instead of doubling down and going, I'm right, screw that, you're wrong, that's wrong, I'm right. Instead of doing that, if you kind of go through and examine it and go, man, maybe you might have something there, like you got a better chance of getting it right. And there's certainly been guys like that. I've made a million mistakes in recruiting. I mean, we've passed on guys that have become really good players at other places. We've taken guys that haven't become what maybe we thought they would become. That's how it's going to go. Like this thing is not 1-to-1. It's an art and a science wrapped in one. It's not one or the other. If you're 5% better than everybody else, you have a big advantage. And that's what we're hoping to be. We're not trying to be 40% better. We're trying to be 5% better,
What's as far as like off-court stuff and using like in recruiting and stuff like that, sometimes I hear people like say that it's like the most important thing, and it's like half the evaluation. But I'm kind of like honestly skeptical about that.
Yeah.
Maybe except like extreme cases of somebody's like horrible person or somebody, or like or like maybe like an amazing like leadership guy or something like that. But outside of those, would you agree that that's that? I mean, honestly, not like really like half the eval is just their personality, or do you think it's really, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is that important?
No, half seems high. Seems high to me. I mean, I've met a lot of really amazing people in my life that I probably would not want to defend the post against Arizona.
Right.
So
Right.
I mean, there's more to it than that, but it helps. Like, I think it really helps to know somebody's background and what makes them tick and how they respond to adversity. I think being a good student is a proxy for being responsible and is a proxy for being coachable, and that's important. You're going to get more out of a team with a bunch of guys that want to be coached and want to do what you ask than with a team with everybody who thinks they know exactly what the best thing is to do and has no respect for authority. Like, it's going to be hard to get everybody on the same page if everybody sees it that way, but 50% seems too high for sure.
And me and Av discussed like stuff like intel off-court stuff and like injury stuff. At least for me, I kind of started to come to conclusion that maybe we should leave that more like to the experts. Like with the intel off-court stuff, maybe have like a psychologist working with the team if possible to analyze that sort of thing. And then like obviously the injury, like medical, like professionals, doctors. Or do you think that sometimes people like kind of step over their like out of their expertise too much, focusing on that, like in the scouting and maybe even like recruiting stuff, or do you think maybe we should be learning more about that as coaches, and like maybe we should make ourselves more knowledgeable about that stuff than we are? And
I think both. I mean, I think it definitely would benefit us to learn more, and a lot of colleges now are doing a really nice job of giving training to their employees on mental health signs and distress and how to identify these sort of things. But also, we got to know as coaches what is beyond our capabilities. I mean, no one will ever call me and try to get me to help identify heart disease. Like, it's not an area where I know what I'm talking about. And I think it's the same deal with mental health challenges, things like that. So, as a coach, you're inevitably going to have some of those things with your players, and you need to know when to send it up the ladder and send it to somebody that knows what they're talking about. And NBA teams, I know, keep those type of personnel on retainer as well, both for their current players, but also for consultations with potential draft picks too. We haven't really consulted our mental health or our medical professionals about potential recruits that way. Maybe it's something we should. I'm not sure it's appropriate or in their purview or job description, but in a perfect world where we had that budget, I think it would be great. I
mean, do you have any question? I wanted to ask him a little bit about my value projection chart. To add that. You kind of think of it similarly if you were to approach, prospect evaluation and projection, or maybe you have a different way of kind of thinking about it. And like, is there anything, like, I have put question marks here? Is there anything maybe you think I should add, or is a big part that I'm missing?
Yeah, I think this is good, and I think again, going back to that book that I can't remember the title of. A big trait of good predictors is they give ranges for their predictions. They don't say, all right, this guy, like, let's say they're talking basketball, this guy is going to come in and average 13.6 points per game. No, they're going to give a range. This guy's somewhere between a mid-major plus and a high major player. That stuff matters, and it's getting right at what you have here, which is that sometimes their value of what they can do right on the floor right now, and how much they can produce and what they could do in time are not the same thing. They're not always the same thing. Now, I think they're correlated. I think you definitely have to second guess yourself if a guy is producing extremely well, but your projection is saying that he has no chance, at the next level. I mean, that's, those are things to second guess. If a guy is playing on the Nike circuit and averaging 20 points per game, but whatever intangible or physical data you have says that he can't be a good high major player, well, that 20 game, the hit rate on that is really high, so I think you got to be conscious of both. I mean, producers definitely have a good chance of becoming better players in college. But again, I think this is an art and a science, so I do think there are guys that have that are really long and really athletic and quick, and maybe were a couple years behind in picking up basketball, that are averaging, pedestrian numbers in shoe circuit or FIBA, but have a chance to play in the NBA. I think that totally exists. I don't think the list of guys that can make the NBA is just a list of the 30 most productive players or 50 most. It's not. There's more that goes into it than that. Age. You hit on age. I think it's a great one. I wish in America we sorted things a little more by birth year rather than graduation year. I think that, because that's the common paradigm in Europe. Everybody talks about he's an 04 or an 05 or an 03 born. They don't talk about he graduates in 2022 or he graduates in 2023.
Right.
And why? What's the difference? Well, you could graduate in 2023 because you're a 17-year-old that went to school early and got sped up, or you might be 19 because you went to school late and reclassified down a year, or maybe were held back or something. And in terms of long-term potential, that 17-year-old and that 19-year-old are on different trajectories.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
In theory, that 17-year-old has a lot higher, if everything else is equal, has a lot higher ceiling of what they can become. Now, I will say this, I think that effect is blunted in college versus the NBA, because we only have them for 4 years. Like I'm okay, don't tell the NCAA, I'm okay having a 21 to 24-year-old on the team. They're going to be pretty good.
Right.
It's not the end of the world to have a older guy on your team. At the NBA level, it's a bigger deal because it drastically hurts their potential. And also the best players in the NBA, you're hoping they're in the NBA for 12, 15 years, not 3, 4, 5, which is all we're going to have them for.
Yeah, because no matter what, even if they're much older in NCAA, they're not going to be like in their 30s. So like they're still going to be on the way up either way.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, do you think it's valuable to? I mean, you kind of already talked about that. You do think it's valuable to look at like floor, median, ceiling, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I believe in all of it. I think it's valuable. I will say I got an anecdote once from a NBA scout, and he told me I got to remember the phrasing. The problem with the high floor, low ceiling guys is that they're often indistinguishable from the low floor, low ceiling guys. That was the quote. And that's something that I've always kind of thought about and kind of stuck with me. And it kind of makes you think about what degree of certainty can you really place on each of these three things, on their floor, on their median, their ceiling,
That's interesting. Yeah, what I say is what's it called? I don't think there's a lot of guys, or as many guys as people think or have the perception of, that they have a low floor, a low ceiling and a high floor, or the what would be like a high ceiling, but like usually floor and ceiling are pretty correlated. Like the higher your floor, the higher your ceiling. In majority of cases, there's not really that many guys that it wouldn't be the case.
Yeah. A final question, like, what do you think like the future of scouting is, like the next big step to like potentially improve player evaluation or even projection in the near, maybe later future?
Yeah, I think at some point all of the player tracking data is going to make its way down to the college level. It's starting now, actually. But I think that if NBA front offices, if people like yourselves, if big agencies and stuff can get a hold of that data, I think there's good little nuggets to bear there that could help in projection. But I think we're years away from that. It's still a technology that's getting improved. and also it's expensive technology. And right now it's not at a price point where all 360 whatever Division I teams can afford it. Right now it's at a price point where probably 10 can afford it, you know. So as that becomes more omnipresent, I think that's going to improve both our in-game scouting of opponents, our ability to help coach our team better, coach shot selection better, coach defensive decision making better. But also, I think it's going to be good data for people in the business of projection, to find better prospects.